Welcome to another episode in the Sabbatical 101 live coaching series, where I bring you behind the scenes of a real sabbatical strategy session with academics from across disciplines. These live coaching sessions give you insight into the questions and worries fellow academics have about their sabbaticals and the practical strategies and mindset shifts that go into planning a life-changing sabbatical. Whether you're dreaming of your first sabbatical or in the midst of planning one, I hope these candid conversations will help normalize concerns and challenges around sabbatical planning, provide practical ways forward, and help you get inspired to make the most of your own sabbatical. My guest for this episode is Allison Bloom. Allison is an Associate Professor in the Sociology and Anthropology Department at Moravian University. She's a medical and feminist anthropologist, and her research centers around social services and gender-based violence, particularly for marginalized populations. Allison has a year-long sabbatical coming up, and in this episode, we discuss her plan to pursue a professional licensure program, finish a book, and determine her future research directions during her sabbatical. If you're wondering how you'll make time for all your sabbatical goals while also making time for rest and self-care, you'll want to listen to this conversation. We talk about how to prioritize sabbatical goals, how to create buffer in your daily schedule, and how to make a plan that feels balanced and not just like you're trying to cram everything into the sabbatical year. I hope you'll find some insights that can help you in your own sabbatical planning process. Hi, Allison. Thanks so much for being part of this live coaching episode for Sabbatical 101.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So I'm really excited to hear more about your upcoming sabbatical, but before we do that, would you mind just introducing yourself and telling our listeners a bit about who you are and what you study?
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Allison Bloom. I have my doctorate in cultural anthropology, but I'm at Moravian University and I teach in a joint sociology and anthropology program. So we do a little bit of everything there. And it's a teaching focused university. So, I spend a lot of time working on pedagogy, but my research looks at intimate partner violence and especially for immigrant communities, thinking about best practices in social service and how we can best think about issues like disability, immigration, other aging, other complicating factors that come into play when we look at the lives of folks who are living through intimate partner violence and try to navigate various different kinds of systems. So that's what my research has mainly focused on up to date, although I'm also thinking of starting some new research, which we'll talk about more when we talk about my sabbatical.
Great. Yeah, sabbatical is such a good time to kind of evaluate what you've been doing and see if there are different directions that you want to go in the future. And so before we hear more about your upcoming year-long sabbatical, tell me a little bit about who your people are for this sabbatical, who's in your family and is going to be affected by the sabbatical.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk about that. I think that's a huge part of just my equation for thinking about how to balance everything in my life for sabbatical and just for academia in general. I have 3 young children, and so that will certainly factor into things as well. 3 little boys. So my oldest just turned 5, and then I have 2-year-old twins. And then I also live with my husband. A lot of juggling of small people and big feelings.
Oh, yes. I can totally. Mine are not that small, but we still have lots of big feelings all the time, every day, mostly in the morning or while we're trying to get everyone out the door before school.
Yes, I know that well.
Okay, so you are looking forward to a year-long sabbatical in the 26-27 academic year. And tell me about it. Tell me how you're thinking about it, what you're hoping to accomplish, and then any challenges you're facing as you think about planning it.
Yeah, absolutely. So this will be my first sabbatical. We had no pre-tenure sabbatical. And so at Moravian, we are eligible to apply for a sabbatical once we've successfully achieved tenure. So I was tenured last spring, and then I applied for my sabbatical this year, and so it won't be for another year. So it's pretty far out that, we have this whole process, and so, I've been trying to figure out where will I be at that point, and what types of things will I be working on at that point. And so I have I think my biggest challenge is that I have a few different irons in the fire, so to speak. So I have a few different things that I'm hoping to accomplish, but needing to balance everything out. And I have the tendency to bite off more than I can chew sometimes. So trying to think about, what's realistic, how to balance everything, how to make the most of the time, but at the same time, not further burn myself out, because I think that's the opposite of what you're supposed to do in a sabbatical.
Sure.
So that's those are some of the things that I'm thinking about at the moment. And I can kind of walk through some of those different projects if that's helpful.
Yeah. I'd love to hear more about that. Yeah. Give me some more detail.
In terms of the different projects ongoing at the moment. So I have my doctorate in cultural anthropology, but my research really sits at the intersection of social work and anthropology. And so one of the things I'd been toying around with for a long time was getting my master's in social work. And my institution recently began a master's in social work program. So I ended up enrolling in the program this past semester and sort of pursuing it somewhat part-time, or, trying to figure out a pathway forward while still working for full-time, and counting some of my former graduate credits towards that program as well. And so in terms of the sabbatical year, what my plan is at the moment with that particular project is I'm doing some of my coursework next year, and I'm doing our first year of general practicum hours towards the degree. And then my sabbatical year, I'm hoping to finish whatever coursework I have left to do in the more advanced coursework year that we're required to finish. And then the second year of practicum hours, which is a higher number of hours. And I'm also hoping to do the clinical track. So that would also have to be a specifically clinical placement, which sometimes those placements can be slightly less flexible in terms of when you can work and those types of things. So that's why I thought it would be a better fit to try to do that during my sabbatical. So I've been kind of rushing to get to that point in the master's program to align it with the sabbatical, which has been a little bit of a challenge. But if I can make it happen, that's one plan for that sabbatical year.
Okay. Can I ask a quick follow-up question about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, maybe a couple questions. The first is, are you pursuing the clinical track because you're hoping to also practice as a social worker? So is it about building your expertise for your research, or is it also about practicing?
That is a great question that I don't have an answer to.
Okay.
I feel a little, kind of ambiguous about where I'm actually going with the program at the moment. Part of it is definitely towards my research and the hope of starting some new research. And one of the things that I have found, and I guess this kind of goes towards a different topic a little bit, but it's hard to break into other kinds of mental health spaces without having some sort of clinical degree. And I did it with the intimate partner violence field because of the way that field's sort of been structured over the years, and that I've just been involved with it for so long. But if I wanted to do more research in a different side of kind of the mental health, social services arena, I think it would be really helpful to have a clinical degree to back up my ability to be in those spaces. Mm-hmm. So that's part of it, is for the research. Part of it is also because my institution is really investing in some of these pre-professional degrees at the moment, particularly mental health degrees, and thinking about counseling programming and social work programming. And so some of it is my own professionalization for teaching in those programs. Yeah. We have a lot of students that come into sociology and anthropology wanting to go into these kind of helping professions, but they don't really know what they want to do. And the psych majors end up going into a lot of that counseling stuff, but we kind of end up with a lot of the macro social work folks that want to work in services and helping people, but not be therapists necessarily. Okay. So I end up teaching coursework that's actually very related to those kinds of fields and those kinds of professions. So some of it is also for my own teaching expertise and being able to better advise students that want to go into those different kinds of jobs. There's talk of creating a bachelor's in social work and then cross-listing a bunch of my courses in that program. Some of it is also just the need for more social work professors at my university. Okay. being able to actually teach in those programs. So, and then the last thing that you asked about was whether I would actually want to be a practicing social worker. And that part is the ambiguous floating orb out there. Like, I don't know. I don't know if that's even a possibility. The path to licensure is so long and difficult. And with my full-time job, I don't know if I'd ever really get there.
Yeah.
But it's not off the table. It's something I would definitely consider. And depending on where my second practical placement is during my sabbatical year, if for some reason they were like, would you want to stay on part-time? It's something that I would consider. So there's a lot of different pathways forward with this, and I don't quite know where I'm going to end up yet.
Yeah. And I think you still have some time. I was just curious. This is so helpful because it helps me see how you're seeing the MSW fitting into the broader ecology and of your career and moving you forward. With the clinical hours, do you have a sense of how much that is?
So next year, I want to say we have 500 hours for the general placement, which equals about 16 hours a week if you do it in this kind of like shortened set of semester weeks that they give for that. If you use the entire 15-week semester, I think you can get away with less hours a week. I'm going to try to, make it as little hours a week as possible next year while I'm teaching full-time. During the sabbatical year, I think the clinical placement is 600 hours total for the year. And that gets like broken down into like 2 15-week semesters, but kind of depends on when you start and end. And it also depends, I guess, on the parameters of the placement. And like, I don't quite know exactly how that's going to shape out. I would guess somewhere between 15 to 20 hours a week for the clinical hours, if I had to make an educated guess.
Okay. So I'm imagining your sabbatical and starting to plug things in and thinking, assuming you move forward on this path, you already know where about half of your work hours for the week on sabbatical are headed.
Yeah.
What are the other things that you're thinking about wanting to accomplish?
So the other goals would really be mostly around, in terms of work anyway, are mostly around research. So my first placement next year is going to be at the local Intimate Partner Violence Services Center, where I've already been doing a lot of collaborative research and work with them. And they are not like a clinical placement, so I can get away with doing my general practicum hours there, but not my clinical hours. So that's why I'm doing the first year there. So I'm going to be spending the year there next year, and hopefully we'll be gathering some data while I'm doing that, or at least working on some projects with them that could translate into potential articles, things that I could write about later. I also have a book contract that I'm working on right now. We have a tentative date for the first draft in this coming fall, but these things kind of drag out, have a long lead time. So I'm thinking that by the time the sabbatical rolls around, I will likely still be working on that in some capacity. I think we're going to get another round of some kind of reviews and then have to do edits towards that. I have a co-writer, so that's why I say they. And then at some point in that sabbatical year, I assume we will be doing copy editing and that kind of level of work. So I'm hopeful that the book will be written by then, but it will be still in the editing phase. So I'll have that. And then the last thing would be thinking about new directions for research. And I am hopeful that wherever I end up with that clinical placement could be an avenue for that. We have some say over where we want to be placed. If there's a topic that we're really interested in, we can try to pursue a placement that will allow us to look more into that specialty. I'm hopeful that wherever I get placed might allow me to start preliminary research or data collection of some kind. So that's the other stuff on deck.
That's great. And what about personal goals or priorities that you're thinking about?
Gosh, yeah, that is an area I have definitely not given as much thought to, but probably
and you still have a little bit of time, to be fair, but just kind of first glance thinking.
Yeah. I mean, I think I would like to get into a headspace where I feel more rejuvenated and excited about the work that I'm doing and less bogged down with like the day-to-day routine. There's such a grind, like with getting little kids out the door into school and then getting myself, through my workday, and then, going back and forth between mom mode and work mode. And I would love to have a time where I can feel a little bit more relaxed about all of that and not so rushed all the time. I know that especially in the next year I'm heading into, I'm literally like, feel like I'm like stealing myself up for it. I think I will need some time to come down from that to a certain extent and then gear back up again for, just whatever is to come during that second placement.
Yeah, for sure. What do you like to do for fun? What fuels you personally and your energy?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. I think that's definitely something that's been neglected for a long time. It's like, oh,
well,
fun.
You have 3
fun.
kids.
I'm allowed to have 5. Yeah. But yeah, I mean that's really helpful to think about if I had more time. I love to read just like for pleasure. I'm a part of a book club with some neighborhood moms, and I really love spending time with friends, with moms, not being in that mom mode, but being social and not being in work mode and being social. And that comes around so rarely. So investing in that would definitely fill me and in certain kinds of ways. So yeah, reading, I work out a lot. Right now, I feel like all of my working out is really just survival. I think it's just to feel healthy and good, but it might be fun to kind of get back into doing something that I'm doing because, I actually enjoy it. Like going out and taking a class instead of just doing a class on my phone, or on the TV. So those are, like the kinds of things that I would imagine would be nice to invest a little more time in.
Yeah, great. So then the other logistical question I have, with a year-long sabbatical, we can kind of think about the summers as bookends. Have you given any thought to whether you want to include those summers in your sabbatical? One way we can think about stretching out your sabbatical is to weave the summer in, or you could also say, I'm taking the summer completely off.
That's so interesting. I hadn't really thought about it that way. I had to come up with a schedule for my sabbatical application, and I did include the summers. I'm imagining that the summer before the sabbatical, I will probably still be very much working to get ready for the next clinical placement, probably doing a summer course or two, taking a summer class or two myself for the master.
To finish up.
Yeah, to keep making sure I have the credits. Because I'll also be taking classes during the sabbatical. I don't know if I mentioned that, but
okay.
So yeah, I will have to do coursework during that time too. But maybe if I manage to kind of get through everything by May, it would be nice to just take the summer off completely, and except for, prepping for the fall, to not be doing research or writing, or hopefully being done with the master's at that point too. So that's definitely a possibility. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but it might be helpful to have that space.
Yeah, I think that would be really nice to give yourself, the way I see your sabbatical, there's a lot in there, right? As I think and that's probably why we're talking right now, because it's a lot of things. I think you'll be able to ramp down a bit because you don't have your normal teaching load and stuff, but you are taking classes and doing your internship. So it might feel really nice to have that summer to look forward to, baking banana bread or whatever you like to do with your kids over the summer, even if your kids are still in whatever childcare situation you want them to be in. It doesn't necessarily mean, keep them all home and do camp mom for the summer, but whatever feels good to you.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good plan. And one thing I probably should have mentioned too is that at Moravian, we actually only get a 1 semester sabbatical paid. So the norm really is just to have a few months. I requested a full year at half pay. So there's a kind of an odd financial component here too, but That's kind of how I justify doing it this way. Is I am trying to squeeze as much out of it. It's not just kind of a break. It's like real, like intensive work that I'm still doing.
Mm.
I guess that's how I justify it to myself more than anything. But it would be nice to also give myself some extra time just to have the actual break from everything before I get back into my regular schedule.
Yeah, just give yourself a little bit of time to recharge. One thing I'm imagining, so you talked about the new research direction.
Mm-hmm.
That might be something where you're thinking about it or somehow keeping track of your ideas that are coming up during that clinical internship. And maybe you're talking with the organization about it. Maybe you're journaling about it. And then maybe there's some time even in that summer. It's not that summer 2027 has to be doing nothing, but maybe that's a nice time when you're kind of able to step away from the busier routines, just dedicate some hours a week to just thinking about this, like percolating in those ideas and seeing what comes up. I think that's a luxury that we don't get much when we're working at teaching, research, trying to balance everything.
Yeah, that's a good idea, to have the space just to think.
As I look at the things you want to accomplish during the sabbatical, I wonder if we could offload that new research direction onto the summer, and it kind of frees up a little space, or you don't have to feel that pressure of learning all this new stuff, engaging in clinical practice, and I also have to be thinking about my new research direction. It doesn't have to all come at the same time as everything else.
I think you're right. I mean, I think maybe there's a little bit of space for some very, very preliminary exploratory research to happen during that year, but then to not think that I'm going to be starting, the tough thing about anthropology is we're expected to do ethnographic research. And the idea would be like, oh, you have this year, you should be using that year to do your ethnographic research. But I have other goals, I have other things that I'm working on. So maybe I don't need to do all the things all at once and could work it into the years to come instead of feeling like I need to use that year for absolutely everything.
Yeah. And also, I would imagine it's the kind of thing where if you're going to a placement, it might be a little different if your placement was going to be in the place that you're already familiar with and you weren't thinking about switching directions or moving into a new area. But I would imagine that if you rush into trying to do ethnographic field work, it might not be that well informed or grounded anyway.
Yeah.
I think you'll certainly learn a lot. I mean, you're an ethnographer, so you're going to be noticing things, right? So it's almost like you're collecting head notes or something, or you'll come away with a lot of like field notes and observations that will feed into whatever you do next. I just wonder from like the perspective of you feeling like you're able to fully engage in the clinical practice and the coursework, if kind of separating the sabbatical year, having that be about the MSW more than the research might be helpful.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. At some point, something has to give, and it's good to go in with a game plan for like, what am I going to prioritize if and when I can't do it all?
Yeah. The way I'm thinking about it too is maybe like foregrounding and backgrounding. If you think about the various things that you're wanting to accomplish, what would you say you would want to foreground and prioritize, and what would you feel comfortable moving into the background?
I think the things that are already in the works are things that have to be foregrounded, right? I have to finish the book. I have a contract and I'm committed to the MSW at this point. So I have to do what I have to do to make that work at this point. So finishing the MSW, although if I didn't, it also wouldn't be the end of the world. But it is this sort of avenue that I'm thinking will bring me to whatever next part of my career, wherever I'm headed. So I think those are the two things that I would foreground. And like you mentioned, the idea of starting a new project could go more into the background.
Yeah. And then you also talked about some other research that you're probably going to work on this fall during your placement. So will you also have some writing projects from that?
I think so. I mean, that is still a bit up in the air. I don't quite know what I'm going to end up taking away from this first year of practicum hours, but I'm just imagining that I'll be able to come away with something that I can work from. So maybe that'll be enough, enough to feel like, okay, I still have things that I can write about, that I can publish on without having to have this entirely new project under my belt already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in terms of thinking about your career, I'm wondering too about your plans to go up for fall. Is this new project something you're thinking about as you move into going up for fall?
Yes and no. I think the book is really the thing that research-wise will get me to the fall. And this is my second book. The first one was my pre-tenure book. This one could be like towards full. We have slightly lower expectations as far as research goes because we're at such a teaching-focused institution. So if anything, I actually will need to ramp up more of my service. So that's really what's going to have to be the next focus. But I'm really looking towards post sabbatical for doing more service. And that will be part of my going up for fall.
That's helpful information to think about, that you have this book that's already going to, but it's not like you need, going up for fall does not hinge on this new project that you're hoping to come out of the sabbatical.
No, it doesn't, which is why I think it's fine to kind of background it. It's more for me. It's more just because you get kind of tired of doing the same research for 10, 20 years, and then you just interested in new things. So that's really what it's about for me. It's just like itching to kind of do something new, but there's no timeline for it necessarily.
Yeah, that makes sense. So if you think about a day on your sabbatical, or what do you imagine your rhythm and routine to be? I know there are unknowns, but just walk me through if you can imagine what a day on sabbatical might look like.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. I hadn't given that much thought, but I am the kind of person that thrives on having routine, and I like having a schedule. So I'm imagining I still would have some kind of routine and schedule. It'll probably be largely shaped around the clinical hours. So maybe I go in, say, for 3 days a week for 6 hours a day, something like that. So, I don't know, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'm just making this up. But
yeah. No, that's fine. I understand that it's far off and there are a lot of unknowns, but it's great to just imagine what the week might look like.
Yeah. And then, I would have 2 other days to play around with. I need time to do the coursework that I'm going to be signed up for. And then the other day, for whatever other kinds of research tasks, that I'm still working on at that point, whether it's book copy editing or, whatever other kinds of tasks that I might have on the docket at that point. And then everything for me is always bookended with when school or childcare starts and ends. Yeah. So my oldest will be in first grade, and then my little ones will still be in daycare at that point. So their hours are a little more flexible, but the school hours are the school hours, and there's going to be a lot of days off and holidays and, teacher conference days and things like that. So I will also need to build in some flexibility for that time as well, which I would like to be able to do without having to freak out about, which is part of the equation too. It's how do you account for those hours that your child is not in school, or people getting sick, or, all the reasons that they're home all the time. So that's a general idea of what I would imagine the schedule would look like.
And with your classes, are those online? Are they in person, synchronous, asynchronous?
The classes themselves are all online and asynchronous. And then we have these periodic residencies. They're 2-day long residencies. They are typically on the weekends, where we have to go in and do day-long in-person work. So it's mostly online. From a day-to-day schedule, it's can be done online aside for those kind of weekends.
Yeah. You have control over when you do that.
Yes.
It sounds like.
Yeah. Which is what makes this doable,
So you'll potentially have clinical days and then your non-clinical days. Where do you see fitting in some of the time for working out or doing things that you enjoy?
Yeah. I think I would like to have a more leisurely start to the day. So maybe I don't start the clinical hours the moment, my older son gets on the bus for school, or I could have an extra hour before I have to go in. Or on the days that I'm not doing the clinical hours, that I wouldn't start my work for another hour or two, or that I end my day a little bit earlier to give me a buffer time to cook dinner, to do all the things that I would like to make time for. So maybe just not having to like squeeze the most out of every single hour of the workday, and making time here and there for that.
Yeah, I like this idea of saying, if it works out that way, maybe the clinical days are just the clinical days in terms of work. You're not also trying to be writing or working on a book. Because I think one of the things sabbatical is really good for is helping us not feel like we're moving in so many different directions all the time. Yeah. So it could be nice, as you think about a sabbatical routine, to really have those kind of clear boundaries around the days as much as you can. And so then you would have another day that is maybe a full day or a half day on your coursework. And then one day that's maybe about writing projects. And I would love it. It might feel very aspirational, but to think about, let's say Thursdays are in the morning, you work on kind of book tasks and other writing things, and then maybe just leaving the afternoons open for whatever you feel like doing.
Yeah, I think I could do that. I tend to be less productive in the afternoon anyway, so it's sometimes by default ends up being like that, where you're just like, well, not getting much done today anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it makes sense to actually like deliberately plan for that instead of it just defaulting to that.
Yeah, exactly. I do think it's nice to plan that with some intentionality. And then the other thing you mentioned, kids getting sick and days off, right? Then it builds in some buffer, because you don't want everything. I mean, you know this because you live this. You can't have everything so tightly packed. Yeah. Otherwise, one thing goes wrong and it's super stressful. So.
Yeah, being able to build that in without having to scramble would be a relief in and of itself.
Yeah. And one of the things I do with my clients is a calendaring exercise where we actually map their projects onto the calendar of their sabbatical. But we start by putting in all the things that are already there. So, basically Thanksgiving week is a wash. And you put in all the days off for your older son. And so you put in all of the constraints you already know about, and then you say, and for you, then that would eventually include your clinical hours. And then you look at the time that's left and put your projects into that. And that helps give you a really clear sense of like, are you being realistic? You could do that and be like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to write an article based on the research that I did this year, because all I have time for is the coursework and the book stuff. Can be a good way to help filter out what really is realistic to get done during the time.
Yeah. That makes sense. And I think I also have some time. I mean, the clinical hours, the sort of odd thing is that they have to take place during the school weeks of the semester. So then there's also these other weeks, that I do have to play around with too. And so if I'm finding that, okay, I do not have time to work on an article, say like while I'm doing the clinical hours, then maybe, come reading in finals week when I don't have anything anymore, that, I won't be so, catching up on all my grading or whatever, that I can actually like take some time to do some other things during those other weeks that I have, that I won't be doing any clinical hours at all.
Yeah, that's great. And you could also think about building in pockets of days off for yourself. So that if you're feeling burned out and overstretched, that you're building in opportunities to slow down.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, Allison, it's been so great to hear more about your sabbatical, and I'm really excited for you to have this time to work on these new directions. So I hope that this has been, helpful in some way and given you some new insight into how you're thinking about planning it.
Definitely. I think a lot of your questions were things that I hadn't really thought about. And so it's given me a lot of food for thought and, ideas about how to better plan and set more realistic goals, I think, for the sabbatical year. So thank you so much.